Hello everyone, this is Mrs. Poland for lesson 1.03, Describing Quantitative Data, aka the SOX lesson. Example 1. How many pairs of shoes does a typical teenager have? To find out, a group of AP Statistics students conducted a survey. They collected from 20 randomly selected female students from East Meadow High School. Below is a sketch of a dot plot, a stem plot, notice the labels, and a histogram. So what I'd like you to do is place the video on hold, and I'd like you to respond to parts A through C. So the smallest number of pairs of shoes surveyed was 13, and the largest was 57. And although you could have also obtained the information from the dot plot, the easiest one to read was actually the stem plot because the data values were actually visible. Part B, the mean of the data set is 27.7 and the median is 25. Which do you think is more likely to represent the center of the distribution? Well, in this case, the median is a more appropriate center, and the reason is that the value of 57, that very high value, would affect the mean. It would increase that average and wouldn't necessarily reflect the center of the distribution. So when your distribution contains values that are quite unusual, you're better off using the median. When your distribution is somewhat symmetric, you're better off using the actual mean. And we'll get more into that in future lessons. Part C, how many people own 10 to 19 pairs of shoes? Again, I used the stem plot and I counted 5 people, and then I labeled it in the appropriate area of the histogram. Part D is probably something you haven't seen before. I ask you to describe the distribution of the number of pairs of shoes. When you're describing a distribution, you need to include the following features: the shape, outstanding features or outliers, center, and spread, and you also have to include the context of the problem, in this case, the number of pairs of shoes. So as an acronym to remember to include those features, we use SOX: shape, outstanding features and outliers, center, and spread. So remember SOX. So let's think about the shape of the distribution. And we're going to look at the dot plot. You can also look at the histogram and the stem plot as well. So you can see that most of the dots are towards the left, and we only have a couple to the right. We can actually see that clearly in the histogram as well. The histogram, we can also see that gap. For the stem plot, you actually have to rotate it, and let me see if I can do that. So I just snipped this picture, and so when you're looking at a stem plot, you actually have to rotate it, and so we can see that the stem plot also has the shape where most of the data is on the low end, and we just have a couple of values on the high end. When that happens, we say that the distribution is skewed to the right. We actually consider this a tail, and the tail is towards the right. So the distribution is skewed to the right. Are there any outstanding features? Well, it looks like 50 and 57 are unusual. We can also see from the histogram that there's a gap. There is no number of pairs of shoes between 40 and 50, and you want to highlight that in your description. So 38 and 51 pairs of shoes, there's a gap between 38 and 51 pairs of shoes, and 57 could be a potential outlier. There's actually a formal test that you have to do to determine if a data value is an outlier, but for the time being, we can just say that it's a potential outlier. Since the distribution is skewed, we actually would use the median and they actually gave you the median in this particular example in Part B. So the median would be 25 pairs of shoes, and the spread is the variation. And you can use the range. We're going to talk about the IQR in a couple of days, as well as the standard deviation tomorrow. So the range is 44 pairs of shoes. Remember, the range is a single number. Please don't give an interval. That would be incorrect. Big faux pas. And that's just the max minus the min. So 57 minus 13 is 44 pairs of shoes. You also have to include the contacts. So if you were writing up this fully, you would say the distribution of pairs of shoes. So you want to be very, very clear so the reader understands exactly which distribution you're talking about. Example 2, we're going to just go over the various descriptions of the shape of the distributions. So the first distribution looks somewhat symmetric. Very rarely are you going to have this ideal model where everything is going to be perfectly symmetric. So make sure to use either approximately or the word roughly. So this is roughly symmetric. So use adjectives. This distribution, in the pink one, is skewed to the right. We see most of the data is towards the low end, and as you go towards the right, that tail, you have fewer data values. So this is skewed right. This distribution, the one in blue, we have most of the data values towards the high end, with lower and lower as you go towards the left. So this distribution is skewed left. We can also talk about modes. So the distribution that's in the red has only one mode. So we say it's unimodal. The distribution that's in the purple is bimodal. We see two modes. So if you were looking at heights of students at East Meadow High School, you may see a bimodal distributions because females tend to be smaller than males. Not always, but tend to be smaller than males. And then the distribution that's in the taupey color, that would be considered uniform. So uniform means that they're basically, these rectangles are basically the same height. They're not perfectly, so it's roughly uniform or somewhat uniform. Okay. So that's how you would describe the shape of the distribution. So we're going to go on to example 3. In example 3, they give you the data set of the number of books in the backpacks from 20 randomly selected students at East Meadow High School. And it shouldn't say based on the histogram, it should say based on the dot plot. So we're going to correct that now, if you can correct that in your notes. They want you to go ahead and describe describe the distribution in the context of the problem. Okay, so I want you to put the video on hold and think about socks, the shape, the outstanding features, the center, and the spread, and also include the contacts. So the distribution of the number of books in backpacks of high school students, that's the context. I'm describing what this dot plot is representing, the number of books in the backpacks. It's skewed to the left. So we see very few dots towards the left. The tail is towards the left, and we see a lot of dots to the right. So we've just got the shape down. I don't see any apparent outliers. Okay, you would actually have to do a test if you suspected them, but there doesn't seem to be anything unusual. So you state that and you address the O. Since the distribution is skewed, when the distribution is not roughly symmetric, you should use the median as the center. And we can see from that little summary statistics that the median, MED, is 3.5. So the median, based on the median, the center is 3.5 books. And for now, we're just going to use the range. And the range is a single number. It's the max minus the min. So 4 minus 0 is 4 books. And that would be the description. And finally, we're going to go on to example 4. Mr. Wilcox is a huge fan of the University of Michigan football. The dot plot shows the number of points scored by the U of M team in the 12 games. Use the dot plot to create a stem plot of the distribution. So I'd like you to put the video on hold and create the stem plot. So this is the stem plot. I didn't have to resort the numbers. I actually just used the dot plot because it's already in order. The leaves are always just single digits. You should not have any decimal points. That would be addressed in the key. The stem, to the left of the stem, you can have, if it was like in the hundreds, it would be composed of like tens places. So the leaves is always only a single number. And make sure that whenever you're creating a stem plot that you include the key. It's very important. So now they ask you to describe the shape. You can either go ahead and use the dot plot or use the stem plot. I chose to use the dot plot. And I said that the distribution of points, because that's what this distribution is, the context of the problem, is roughly symmetric. If you said slightly skewed, notice I used the word slightly, to the right, you would be just as correct. It wouldn't be heavily skewed to the right, but that's personal preference. What measure of center is most appropriate to describe the distribution? If something is roughly symmetric, you're best using the mean for the choice of the distribution because that would be most accurate since it actually includes each one of the data values in the calculation. Are there any potential outliers? There's a possibility that 37 and 38 are potential outliers because they're far from the other points. But again, in a couple of days, you'll see a formal process that you use to determine if something actually is an outlier, if it's unusual. So every single lesson, or most lessons, I'll have in a box the key objectives of the lessons and the important ideas. So when you're studying for an exam, you may want to review these key features. It's everything in the course. If you cut them out, it's everything in the course that you need. So today our objective was to interpret dot plots, stem plots, and histograms. They are dealing with quantitative data. We were working on identifying the shape of the distribution. And we also wanted to learn how to describe the overall pattern. And whenever you describe your overall pattern, you have to include the shape, the outstanding features, the center, and the spread. And make sure to always include context in your description. You will find when we start reviewing for the AP exam, their first question is normally based on a description. And you'll see more of this in the next few lessons. So have a wonderful day, ladies and gentlemen.